I'm always wanted to meet as many people as possible and understand, what they think and why they think it. So it's similar with you. I want to get into your kind of philosophy, Ben, as I've got it here as a classical anarchist.
Yep.
Libertarian socialist.
Yep.
Essentially a left libertarian.
Yep.
There's a lot in that. Come on. Explain
is.
this all to me. Like, what's your viewpoint? Where does it come from? How do you see the world?
All right. So yeah, that's the $1 million question. It's a big one as well. It's a really complex question. So I think we can discuss different aspects, discuss kind of around it. But essentially, left libertarianism, libertarian socialism is the idea that you want to maximize freedom for people in general. So maximizing of liberty, that's the libertarian part of it. And the socialist part of it is explaining that the best way to do that is with traditionally socialist structures rather than more capitalist structures. So capitalism and socialism are not the only two ways to manage societies. There are other concepts, but one of the best ways to understand socialism in today's world is to kind of contrast it to capitalism in today's world. So one of the biggest problems that socialists in general see with capitalism is the authority going to those who have capital. If you look at the big corporations, they can control things far more effectively than most governments can. They have the power to essentially influence how people live their lives. That's a lot of people will complain and say, you're talking about crony capitalism. I don't see a distinction. I think capitalism inevitably leads to crony capitalism. Simply, by what it is. If you give power to those who have capital, then you no longer have a truly free society. You no longer have people having freedom. The freedom.
Do you give power to them, or do you concede power to them?
Good. Yeah, actually, that's a good way to frame it. I would say, you concede power to them in a capitalist system. But you, after a while, no longer have a choice. If you imagine a poor person born in even a nice country. So imagine the United States, for example, and a poor person born in some horrible little town in the middle of nowhere US, not a lot of opportunities. They are not going to end up going and working for NASA and being a rocket scientist because they don't get the education in that little town. Their parents don't get the appropriate work in that little town. It's not the case that you can always just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and be anything you want to be. That classic American dream is a lie. That doesn't exist. And socialism recognizes that. So what socialism is essentially largely about, the classical definition of it is that the means of production, distribution, and exchange are owned by the people and not by, a centralized entity such as a corporation. And how that usually manifests is in essentially working structures. So rather than having a corporation, which is this entity that people are working for, you just have people coming together and working together in order to achieve goals. And that can be in a business-like structure. You can have things like worker cooperatives, which are people coming together and we all own the business that we are working towards and we all get the profits from that business. Rather than I am the person who owns the business and I will pay you this amount regardless of how well the business is doing. Maybe you can ask for a raise at some point, but that's my decision as the boss. That's the capitalist way of doing things.
Can you not have a mix of the two?
You can, but largely it's a matter of how the society is structured. And that's where a lot of arguments actually come in with libertarian socialists, is how much do we want to say we recognize or don't recognize some of these kinds of things? So one thing I always like equating it to is, in an anarcho-capitalist worldview, you can have a contract which says, okay, I freely signed this contract to go work for these people. Okay, can I freely sign a contract to be a slave to somebody else? Or is that not okay? Is that something we would say, okay, even though there's a contract, we don't recognize that because we do not consider slavery acceptable. In the same way, I would say a employment contract is something I do not consider acceptable because you're basically making yourself a wage slave to that company.
Okay, right. Lots to get into here.
Oh, yeah.
Are you basically a commie?
Short answer, no, because communists are generally against money. And I think markets are one of the best ways to sort out the value of things in society. So I'm very much in favor of markets, very much a free market advocate. Although in left libertarianism, we often use the term freed markets rather than free markets to imply kind of the difference that the markets are currently controlled and we wish to free them. We wish them to be freed rather than just free.
Okay, so we have a company.
Yep.
There's 100 employees. And you advocate for the workers owning the means of production. Is it an equal share, or is there structure behind that? Is there consideration given for how long you've been at the company, how senior your role is?
That depends very much on the individual organizations. In a small worker cooperative, usually not, because it's just people coming together, for example, to sell fruit at a market, and they are all really equals.
Yeah, I get that. I'm thinking...
In a larger organization, yes, there would generally be some kind of structure, and it would be structure that would be agreed by the people. And again, exactly how that is done is a case-by-case basis. And, I'm not going to sit here and claim to have all the answers. One of the big things about the libertarian side of libertarian socialism is, if I were to come and say, here's all the answers, this is exactly how society should be, then basically I'm now a dictator. I'm dictating this is how society should be, and I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone does. So you aim to work towards the most equitable situation, even if you don't know what that's going to eventually look like.
So how do you actually make the steps to get towards that? Do you try and carve that out within the structure we've already had? Do we try and encourage companies to think along the lines of consideration for the employees? I mean, a good example in the UK, you would think of, there's a company called, you must know of John Lewis.
The name rings a bell.
It's a
department store.
It's a department store.
Right,
They've got hundreds around the country. But aren't they primarily owned by the staff?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, look it up. There is a structure in place. Yes, they have shareholders. Yes, they have directors who are paid lots and lots of money. But I'm pretty sure all the staff are members. But is that what we're essentially saying? Rather than trying to create an entire new society where every company is forced via some kind of regulation to do this, it's more an encouragement that this is the right thing to do. That's
more my preferred method, yes. But there are plenty of people who agree with me politically who would have other methods, like revolution, violent anarchy, that kind of thing. I don't advocate for that. I think that's a bad way to go about it. I think you're more likely to end up with despotism, people basically seizing power and then controlling things in a far less free situation when you do that. But that said, we do have examples in the real world of societies which had crumbled so much that they could then rebuild themselves in a more libertarian socialist kind of way. One of the good ones there as an example is Rojava. That's the northeastern Syria administrative region. So the war in Syria basically completely decimated everything. And about 10 years ago, Rojava established itself as a libertarian socialist state, independent of Syria from their perspective. So far, I think nobody recognizes them other than Catalonia, which also nobody recognizes as an independent state. So, okay. But, they are self-administering and they are a libertarian socialist society. They're definitely not perfect. They've definitely done things which are not in line with libertarian socialist ideals.
Such as?
There was a few years ago some concerns from humanitarian groups about children being used in the army there. There were some concerns about treatment of prisoners. But that said, unlike pretty much everything else in that part of the world, they've abolished the death penalty. There are rights for prisoners treated how they should be treated. Feminism is a part of the platform of the group who are organizing. I'm not going to even call them a government because it's libertarian socialism. The group who are organizing have consider feminism a strong part of the system. So they are, I would say, better politically than pretty much everything else around them.
But if they're not government, what are they? How do they self-organize?
I would call them an organizing group. But
isn't that what government is?
To an extent. So that's where you actually have to come into the question of, what is government and what even is a society? And that, you're getting into kind of some deep philosophical things there. We are human beings. We're just an advanced ape sitting on a rock spinning around the sun. And we make up these ideas like government and corporations and borders and that sort of thing. And that's not a bad thing to make up. It helps us organize. It helps us give a better world. But sometimes we make up things which are suboptimal. And government is one of those things where perhaps it started off as these are the people who we should get to help us organize and make some decisions, but it's largely turned into these are the people who make the rules that we have to follow.
Yes.
And that's a problem.
Did you find anything?
Yeah, it is owned by a trust on behalf of its employees, and bonuses paid out on the profits.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it can happen.
Absolutely. And there are so unions are often also seen as a example of an attempt to move towards more libertarian socialist ideals within a capitalist society.
Are you pro-union?
Only insofar as I think in the societies that we live in that have unions, yes, but I think those societies are fundamentally broken. And the better way than having unions is to fix the society. So, I consider unions a good band-aid in a bad situation, but in a well-functioning society, we wouldn't need them.
So are you kind of aligned with the anarchists from sort of the Thatcher era?
Yeah, I would say most anarchists from that era probably are more libertarian socialist, yeah.
Is any amount of government useful? Because I know from meeting so many people on this podcast, there are a range of views. There are libertarians who believe in no government, and there are libertarians who believe in minimal government or small government. And so that there is that range that exists. I would say I largely agree with the majority of what libertarians say, but I don't agree with no government. I think I almost think that governments are like a natural monopoly that will always happen. We always will have structure.
So, I think that's actually, again, then coming back to the question of what is government. So, do you need a group of people who help organize everything? I think yes. Do you need a group of people who define laws? No. I think laws can be defined by the collective as a whole and then organized by that organizing group who are very easy to change out. But again, it's one of those, I do have to say I don't know a lot to some of these questions because, I don't know what the future looks like and I don't know how things would progress as we move more in that direction. Maybe at some point we would get to a point where we could say, hey, look, government actually isn't necessary at all. We can get rid of them. Or maybe we'd get to a point where we say, okay, we actually need to have these particular structures here, which are fulfilling some of the things that governments used to do, but, not all. So it really is an open question.